information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. InsideAnalysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast-to-coast radio show in the country all about the information economy. That's right, it's time for Inside Analysis. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, of course. And folks, I'm so excited to have an all-star cast for you today. We have our good buddy Yves Mulkers from 7W Data, and we have one of the happiest and most successful guys in our business on the line today, Girish Pancha, CEO and co-founder, I believe, of StreamSets. And if you're wondering who those guys are, well, a company called Software AG just agreed to buy them for $567 million, I think it was, which is some pretty cool stuff. So we're going to talk about this industry, what's happening in the data world, why you see these blockbuster deals. And we talked about this a couple months ago, actually, I guess early at the beginning of the year. I realized in a show, it's no longer just millions or tens of millions. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars are being thrown at these big data companies. I just came back from the Snowflake Summit, which was amazing, quite frankly. I mean, those folks have just torn it up, quite frankly. They're doing an excellent job, primarily around partnerships is kind of what I see it. You know, they went and built a relational database up in the cloud. They're not the first relational database in the world, obviously, but they saw the cloud as the new center of gravity, and they put a lot of effort in, and they have a very clear and clean partner strategy, which is we'll manage the data in this, and is basically this engine. And then you do your analysis or build your apps on top of that. As long as they stay true to that, I think they're going to be a force for a long, long time. But we'll talk today about the modern data stack and about technology stacks and about how all this really matters to you as business people in the real world trying to reinvent your businesses. So let's bring in Girish Pancha from StreamSets. First of all, congratulations on the acquisition. I think it's really good news. And as you know, I'm excited about it because you've really fleshed out a stack for Software AG. Of course, they have ARIS, which is their process mining sort of redesigned technology. They have in the middle, you've got this wonderful API stack that they've had for a long time now with web methods. And then at the bottom, you got StreamSets as the data. Tell us, give a layman's perspective on what you sought to build at StreamSets and what you built over time and how it kind of fits into this new vision. Go ahead.
Thanks, Eric, and really excited to both be here on the show and, as you alluded to, excited for a new chapter here for us at StreamSets as part of Software AG. Maybe going back a little bit to the early days here, we started the company in the mid 2000s in second half of 2014. And, we took a little while really just, kind of looking at the market. We ended up talking to probably about 50, 60 enterprises before we, jumped in all in and got our Series A funding in 2015. And just maybe just a little bit of background about me. I've been in the data space my whole, I guess I've been cursed in being in the data space my whole career. Started Oracle where I was fresh out of school. This was the good old days, right? Where fresh out of school, Larry Ellison put me on a small team to do Oracle's first business intelligence product. So, in those days,
Wow.
Of course, coming out of college, not really knowing what the real world was like, I assumed that all data was in Oracle. That's what we were taught. That's what we believed. So off we went saying, what can we do with that? And of course, we built all these great user interfaces, the earliest quote unquote analytics, what's in the database, what's the, the classic computations, what's the average salary for the employees and all these sorts of things we were working on. And about a decade into it, I came to appreciate and realize, talking to customers again, that data was not in Oracle. The data was all over. In those days, of course, it was IBM, it was SAP, there's a number of other systems that was locking in a lot of the data. So anyway, fast forward to when we started off StreamSets, the fundamental principle that I think we had started, what I'd done in my previous role as the Chief Product Officer at Informatica was that the frequency of consumption of information in enterprise was somewhere between what I'd call intermittent to at best periodic, right? So intermittent is really more like when you need it, you ask for something, and here's where you hear all these stories about how it's so hard to get at the data, and you spend most of your time just kind of get data together to make any decision, et cetera. And then, of course, if you could even make that somewhat of a business process, you would end up still with maybe it's a quarterly reporting if it's financial, if it's also CFO, maybe weekly, monthly, et cetera. But we never really got beyond that. And the problem was always thought of as a design time problem. Hey, I've got all my information all over the place. How do I get it here so I can see a report? In the mid 2000s, we started seeing technologies that were dealing with these big data components. Obviously, volume, huge amounts of information, but the other one was velocity, right? No, the data is speeding up. It's being delivered by one of the pieces, by the way, at Software AG is an IoT technology, also Cumulosity. Data is getting generated by devices and sensors and other non-applications, et cetera. And as we thought about all of that, we started really believing that the problem was, of course, still getting access to the data and getting it together, but really ensuring that information was constantly being, quote unquote, flowing into where it was needed in the business. And that was the genesis of StreamSets, to focus equally on the operationalization problem as the design problem.
That's a really good point. So when I think about, for example, cash flow, right, in an organization, let's pretend data is cash, right? And what you really want is a very smooth cash flow. You don't want giant pools of cash kind of piling up, as opposed to, you don't want any money at all. You better have cash piled up than no money at all. But when it all kind of piles up, things stagnate, it gets harder to get to access, and just the dynamics seem to change a bit. And so you seem to figure out, you think about data lakes, for example. I almost wonder if we didn't make the same mistake as we did in data warehousing with a data lake, where we tried in data warehousing to pull all the data into the data warehouse so we could have one place and build all up cubes on top of it, et cetera. Well, that only works so far. And then we realized we're not going to get all the data in there, and you don't even want to get all the data in there. What data do you want in versus not in? And warehousing was designed in a very different era, when the pipes were thin, the processors were slow, storage was expensive. All those dynamics have changed now. And so that dynamic has changed. And, you have this lake house architecture now and other things coming out to sort of solve for that problem. But at the core of all of it is the flow of data. And I think that's where you really figured something out, as you just mentioned, is how can we optimize the flow of information through this organization such that it's not all this sort of ad hoc querying back and forth and jumbled spaghetti architecture underneath. And I'll just throw out one comment, because you were at Informatica for a while. When I first started wrapping my head around ETL and how all that works in large enterprises, how you just fewer and fewer batch windows because people want more and more data. Like, how are you going to get that data in there? Well, there are lots of things you could do to solve that. SyncSort came along many, many years ago and would have very precise algorithms that would compress the data, for example. So there are lots of ways you can speed things up, but they're all kind of like Band-Aids if you really take a hard look at the situation. And you seem to focus more on solving for the foundational challenge, so you don't need those Band-Aids. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I'm reminded of an adage that we used to say about data warehouses. And again, look, I've been around the block, so I've been part of this. So I'm not insulting anybody. If I'm insulting anybody, I'm insulting myself. But when you say Band-Aid, I think about injuries. And when we used to think about the warehouse, we used to half jokingly say it's where data goes to die. It's where data goes to get archived. So somewhere as it's getting to its death, you're band-aiding things, trying to keep it alive a little bit longer, I suppose. So yeah, look, I think look, this is really, to me, the this kind of business I shouldn't, maybe before we use the word business transformation, I'd like to first say there's been some industry transformations in a sense, right? So when you think about the companies that have disrupted major industries, of course in the mid 2010s, I was focused on how's Uber pulling this off, and if you think about the architecture for Uber, there was a head of the data platform. the solution always required a data platform and, of course, your smart app, something very simple that looks amazingly easy to use. But underneath it was a ton of analytics that really transformed what cab companies thought was digital transformation V1, which is, hey, I can put a voice recognition system maybe, or I can put a touch-tone recognition system, IVR system, and I'm automated. No, now it became really a situation where data was being used every second, every millisecond, in order for in this case an application to behave itself. And I think that's really where we're going with anything and everything in the enterprise right now, that you've got to be making these kind of micro decisions all the time. And your data, as you're making these decisions, it changes the nature of the data. So you have to constantly be looking at that, saying, what is the act of making a decision doing to the data that I'm making a decision on, and getting into that constant loop.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, Yves Mulkers, I'd like to bring you in, maybe ask a couple of questions of Girish as well, as I try to absorb everything he just said, because that was pretty interesting. But I mean, Yves, you've been around, you've been practicing for a while now, and there really is this sea change for how to do things, and you're on projects, and so that there's a very long tail to legacy. Right. I mean, mainframes are still everywhere. We're talking again about getting data out of mainframes. That's not going to change anytime soon. So from your perspective, how should a business person straddle these worlds? Because at a certain point, you got to kind of jump off the old ship and get on the new ship. But what do you think, Yves?
Well, it's a big struggle. I mean, moving from the one world to the other world, you still have these legacy systems which are still in place. So you need to have something that connects to the old systems and provides you, in a certain business cases already, that millisecond type of insight based upon your data, like Girish just explained it. I think that's really the definition of becoming data-driven. And if you can take one of the business cases and build that in a simple way out there, that should bring to the people that streaming data or real-time analytics is really something that you can use into your business. But we're still so hooked up on the nightly flows that takes about 8 hours, 9 hours to get the batch insights. And nobody thinks, hey, if I would have this embedded analytics right here, right now to support my decision, that would be marvelous. But because they don't know the capabilities of the technology, I think that's really a burden or a blocker before moving into new systems.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point too. Maybe we'll throw it over to Girish to comment on that. I mean, how much of the work do your sales teams wind up doing, and your sales engineers just educating the enterprise about what's possible today versus, really looking forward and designing next generation systems? Is there still a pretty heavy lift in terms of getting people to know what's even possible, Girish?
Yeah, look, I mean, when we talk about the elegant, beautiful solution, and when you start focusing on the complexity of it all, and how kind of a new way of doing it will fix it all, it resonates from a theoretical perspective, but let's face it, most people don't want to sit there and take a long time building it. No, they want to get those quick wins. They want to get the fast wins right away. So what I would say is that in terms of like making an initial decision, what I call kind of like the minimum market requirement for the problem, you still have to go with the simplicities or the itties that people care about, simplicity, ease of use, of course, scalability, and those are things they don't want to be giving up on right up front. Maybe things around data privacy and security and things. So those are like the basic decision-making evaluation criteria, I think, for that initial getting the job done. And the way I look at it is, it's up to the technology then to provide that next help for the user, right? Which is, if you use the right like modern technologies, and of course, it'll be a little self-serving here, what we've done here at StreamSets. If you use us, then what we say is, look, you're going to get some benefits that you may not have really appreciated up front, but it's going to help you. The easiest one, which again, people get, but it's not going to be giving you kind of immediate value, is when you change out your platforms. Like even as we have a company like Snowflake really taking charge and kind of starting to own the kind of cross multi-cloud data warehousing infrastructure. You have the cloud service providers having a number of other technologies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, etc. And we find in real world enterprises, people make decisions in an ad hoc manner, just like we ask them to make a decision quickly. And you find this kind of what do you call a number of different platforms all still in the mix in an enterprise. So when we tell them, hey, look, even if you're using something today, you can migrate that very easily without redoing all your work. That I think is a good kind of like it's a good feeling to have, but they don't really make that decision because of that. You don't future-proof the decision you're making today, right? And that's one example. But I think the where we try to bring value, where we think we can really help the world in the longer run is we've also just really instrumented our pipeline technologies so that if you use it, it's actually kind of live and it's capturing a lot of information. And that information can be put to use not just tomorrow and the day after, but I think for, the next 10, 15 years. And that's, I think, what we want to talk about. And so we'll show kind of like what the end goal would be. And then we solve like a very simple problem to get going here. So.
Yeah, instrumentation. So just to kind of explain to our audience what that means, it's an IoT term that's used quite extensively, and it is to put sensors in all sorts of different places in your environment. So in the manufacturing world, where this has been done now for decades, you put sensors in all the different component parts along the manufacturing line so you can understand what's working well, what isn't working. And it's fascinating what you can do. A lot of these systems will use sound to determine, because if you've got wheels spinning, if the sound starts to change, if it's kind of whinnying up and it's getting a higher sound, or if it's going low, that tells you there's something wrong. This is observability. I mean, it's what your car engine does when the check engine light comes on. It's like, oh, there's something going on here, something fed into that. So if you instrument the platform that you built, what that says is the folks at StreamSets understood we need to know how well this thing is working in different environments, because every environment is going to be different. Every enterprise environment is unique. They are remarkably topographically challenging landscapes, quite frankly, and that's half the problem of doing enterprise sales, is that it's not a one size fits all kind of situation here. There are so many complexities to these environments, and guess what? Some of those components are running mission critical business processes, and guess how many chief operating officers want to just go ahead and rip that stuff out and replace it? None. That's the answer. None of them want to do that, but they do know that they have to do it at some point. So how do you get there? And you get there through instrumentation, through strategy, through planning, through looking at the modern data stack and finding ways to do it. Then you start small and kind of build out big. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You are listening to the only coast-to-coast show about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, take it to the future indeed. We're talking to Girish Pancha of StreamSets and Yves Mulkers of 7W Data today. There was an announcement fairly recently that Software AG will be buying StreamSets for $567 million. That's a pretty tasty sum of money. And it really speaks to the significance of what these folks have built. In the old world, you had a database. That's where the data was. Girish was joking that they used to say, of course, all the data is in Oracle. Well, there are lots of places where that data lives. And especially these days, my goodness, look at the number of database technologies that you can use today. There are more databases than ever before. There are new ones coming out. Like it seems like every month or 2 months, there's a new database, new analytic database, new functionality all the time. And that, again, speaks to the power of data and of transformation and of new business models. If you look at all the new companies that are coming out, and we mentioned Uber, of course, but lots of the companies since then, they all have a data science approach to really understand the information, understanding it as quickly as possible, real time we talked about. Knowing right away what's happening is a lot more valuable than finding out later, and doing some reporting and trying to understand why you went bankrupt, for example. You don't want that. So you want to be able to have the freshest data And I use the term waterworks to describe StreamSets for a couple of reasons. One of which is because you think about how water comes into your house, goes all around the house. You could have filters on your tap water, for example, for drinking water, because you want to be very pure. Well, it's a quality issue, like a data quality issue, right? But there are some places where you don't need that, like in your mud room for washing out mud off shoes or something. You don't need the highest quality water for that particular task. So in that sense, it's somewhat similar. But let's talk about some use cases, some actual clients. So Girish, I'll throw it over to you to put some meat on the bones here. Can you talk about some clients you've worked for where you really solved that problem? And what I see, and I'm sure this is the case, is that when someone does take the plunge, no pun intended, and they use your technology, it's going to open up a lot of other valves throughout the organization. And they're going to figure out, wow, we actually solved XYZ other problems by solving this one set of ABC problems. But what do you think, Girish?
Yeah, I'll give you one of those examples along the way here. But no, maybe to kind of just take the big picture view for starters. And I think, look, before I give you a few examples, the situation is, I think, that in any vertical, for any use case, you need to think about it this way. So I think when you think about what data, if you think about data as kind of an always flowing as your waterworks, where can you apply it? Now, obviously, the easy ones are things like customer engagement, where we're moving beyond thinking of customers in a transactional manner and moving into really like thinking of it more as an interaction and just eventing model. Every little interaction the customer matters, etc. Those sorts of things also, I think, are easily and equally applicable to any other domain that you care about in the business. So it could be around your products and services, et cetera. And it's not just about engagement. It could be also around, generically what we describe as anomaly detection. It could be bad actors in the case of like fraud. It could be, things malfunctioning in the case of IoT, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, I think, you can kind of pick and choose and you can easily build a story and a need for this for very specific use cases. So I'll give you maybe two or three just to kind of talk about that business impact. One of them is a pharma customer of ours. And, when you think about data science, I would say there's a bit of a hero culture when it comes to data science. You focus on that one answer, and often, it might have taken them a long time. And you say, oh, but look, they just came up with this amazing insight. You've heard the satellite imagery stories where, you could short Best Buy because there was no cars in the parking lot. These are sorts of stories that you heard about big data. And if you think about in pharma, I mean, billions and billions of dollars are being spent in that process of getting drugs to market. We've seen that obviously through the COVID phase 2. And the thesis here for this customer of ours was that really there must be learnings that you can have between all the different R&D teams that are working somewhat independently across, and trying to get it through regulatory approval. And of course, lots of data scientists and whatnot. And the easy answer would have been say, well, let's just throw it all into this big pile of junk and data lake and everything, can get solved there. But the chief data officer here, really, I remember this when he adopted us. I said, well, why wouldn't you just, kind of get all the data in the lake? He said, I'm going to go to the board and I'm going to give them a business case justification that we're going to save billions of dollars either in speeding up these or even, in fact, even making sure that these drugs do get approved. And I don't want to go back to the board after I've set this infrastructure in place to explain to them why it's no longer working. It was as simple as that. So the thesis was, once in production, new data is constantly coming, new clinical trial data, new R&D data, et cetera. And all of this needs to be always kind of fresh and always trusted and whatnot, so that when you do your machine learning algorithms on that, when you do your data science algorithms on that, you have the confidence to stand up to your board and say, this stuff is working, I certify what I've done, right? And that was the simple answer. And this is one of our early customers that really made us appreciate the broader impact you could have rather than kind of just a simple point solution. So kind of, really half the business in a sense. If you think of pharma's R&D versus sales and marketing, now half the business was what we applied this to.
Wow.
Maybe I'll give you one other example here. So because you're talking about kind of starting small and getting bigger, and that was one of our big customers. It's a bank. And initially, the problem was around a fraud detection need. So again, it's a very classic, hey, when it's fraud, it's got to be real time. This data is kind of streaming, and false positives are terrible and false negatives are terrible. So now what do we do to minimize the false positives and false negatives? So they did that, and they worked. And frankly, I would say, it took probably 6 months to get this system in place. And we were very excited about that. But at some point, a light clicked in our customers' heads, and they said, look, we got this one done. We look around the bank, there's actually like 200 possible opportunities to solve this problem. And so what they ended up doing was switching from a business value justification to really setting up a center of excellence. And they call this, they used to call this federated data engineering. Today, they call it the data mesh. Because that's a new word to describe this old problem, so to speak. But really what they're doing is saying, look, we will have one central spot where we all start speaking and using the same kind of language and the same infrastructure. But everybody then can opt in to participate a lot or a little. And if you participate a lot, you're both a data consumer of the Center of Excellence and a data provider. And now many, many more use cases are now being supported by a single you've standardized on your pipelines, right? So you're not building new pipelines for each of your rooms. You're basically saying the whole building now has one standardized format for data flow within the building.
That makes a lot of sense. And thinking in terms of data products, maybe I'll throw it over to Yves, and I'll throw a question over to you, and then feel free to ask Girish some questions. But when you start talking about data products, I think that represents another sea change in how we view data, because you used to just think of apps, and then the apps pull the data when they need them. But when you start talking about data products, you're really talking about reuse and about, I think, a real maturation in the data field to kind of get beyond the plumbing and get right to the meat, which is going to help you solve some problems, right? So I think that we're kind of watching this evolution happen. And like I suggested earlier, it's taking a pretty significant turn to be revolutionary in terms of how you solve problems. But, I view that concept of data products, and this is also part of parcel to data mesh, it is that we're really getting somewhere, and we've kind of moved past needing a DBA to do a better job fine-tuning some index somewhere to a much more holistic solution, which is a data flow architecture. But what do you think, Yves?
Yeah, you get some points on that. The data flow architecture is aligning, in fact, your data products to the business strategy. So you want to know something about your business. What I find often is the data products concept in itself, it feels like we're building the next Excel sheets and we're building the next Access sheets, and we're throwing it around, and that will solve our issue. But the thing that is often not discussed about this is that we have in a data product, if you really want to do it right, you have the governance, you have the observability, you have the semantic model, all these things which guarantee you a certain quality of your data, and not only a certain, guarantee you the quality of your data is of most importance. And if we start talking about data products, we're talking about data mesh, and I often talk to people, say, yes, start your data product and you will have the data mess, because they don't apply all the rules which you should apply on doing good data management. And I think if you look, for example, at DMBOK, you have about 8 to 10 principles where you do your base your data management upon. And if I'm talking to customers, very often you get the question is, where do we start in all these kind of principles? Now, recently, we've been building our framework on data management, where we only focus upon 4 principles, and that's the semantics, your logical model, and as well your definition of your data, and attaching that to your business strategy. And I think that's very important, and brings us back to one of the principles where Girish is telling, we centralize the data flow. So I'm really interested in previously we built a central data warehouse where all the data was centralized, and we had a data lake where we were putting all the data upon the data lake, but still we were missing some bits and pieces around that to guarantee the quality of that. And allowing everybody to explore that data lake has been proven that that's very tricky as well, because not everybody is as data savvy as they should be. So a lot of coaching around that part, that brings it back again to the center of excellence. I think that's a good thing, what you brought in, Girish, on building that center of excellence and trying to spread that within the organization. But if I understand correctly, StreamSets is not purely about centralizing the data, but leave the data where it is, and then try to bring it together at a certain point in time when you need these insights, if I understood it correctly.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, yeah, and you hit the point, because in the old days, you think about the only way solving that is to get it all into one spot where you can kind of then have that confidence. And I think, the alternative is say, look, if you actually, say, I trust the pipelines, I trust the underlying system to, bring the data where it's needed. You end up taking it to where it's needed, and it's like you bring the data to certain types of compute, and you do a lot of compute on the data without having to move it around, all over the place. And you hit another point, Yves. I want to kind of emphasize that, because I think like the data mesh versus the data mesh concept, I think there's really just two things that kind of ultimately are going to make it a success or not. Okay, one is the time dimension. Can I trust, is this up to date? Is this, no, I needed it today, I needed it yesterday, do I have it, right? That's one piece. And the other is what you described, you use words, observability and governance. I use the word confidence sometimes to describe that, right? So because governance has this kind of old school,
policies,
yeah, just people tell, you're stopping me from getting it done. And the whole point, I think, is speed and agility are considered to be the kind of like the enemy of confidence, right? Either you're confident and you're slow, or you're fast and you're messing things up. You're a hacker, right? And a data mesh, a data product, anything, we have to solve for both simultaneously, right? We need to be both, fast, and we need to have confidence in this. And if you can have that, then everybody starts using it, and everybody starts, adding to it, and before you know it, you're actually in kind of a good feedback loop here.
That's real. I'm taking some notes here. I like that. Either you're competent and slow, or you're fast and you're messing things up. You're a hacker.
Well, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, did an IPO on that, right? No, our differentiator is that we move fast and break things, because that's the assumption. You move fast, you're going to break things, right? And the question is, what do you do, to move fast and fix things? So
yeah, but I think with the technology and the speed and the capabilities, the power that you have right now, you can be confident even at a higher speed. And that's what I see in newer technologies that supports you in really trusting your data, doing data profiling as we've been discussing in the chat as well, doing data profiling really real time, and not just running your batch and after a few hours you know what the deviation of your data set will be. And if you can do that really, then you can do the you can be confident on your real-time data. And I think that's a good evolution where we see platforms like StreamSets is kicking in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so just to kind of explain to our audience here, we talk about observability and governance and so forth. I like the way that Girish kind of grouped that together and called that competence. If you're confident in your data, and this is the opportunity cost of not having confidence is very hard to calculate, but it's very significant. I mean, the bottom line is either people don't use it or they do use it. And if they get bad results, they're going to stop using it, just like a search engine. I joked a couple of years ago on one of these shows, I was wondering why chatbots were all of a sudden everywhere. And one reason why is because technology allowed them to be more cost effective, et cetera. But my theory on chatbots on websites is that search stinks, meaning the search within websites. You go to like the search field, I want to find some product or service or something on your website. You plug it in that search engine, you get a bunch of nonsense like press releases that are completely unrelated. That was a real problem, but we'll pick it up after the break, folks. Don't touch that dial. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis. We're talking with a couple experts today. Girish Pancha, co-founder and CEO of StreamSets, now becoming part of Software AG, and my good buddy Yves Mulkers from 7W Data. And Girish, when I was talking to the folks at Software AG, they were telling me about this whole concept of a digital backbone. And I'm a words guy, I'm a media guy. I'm always looking for terms to describe things. And as you know, as well as I do, in our industry in particular, man, a term comes along, people glom onto it. We're talking about data mesh. We talked about big data, AI, machine learning. There are all these terms that get thrown around. And you have to kind of sort through things to get to the bottom and figure out what they all really mean. But I will say I love this concept of a digital backbone, because if you get right down to brass tacks, if I'm a business person, I'm trying to create some new business model. Well, how am I going to do that these days? You're probably going to do it in the cloud. You're probably going to leverage whatever machinery already exists. In fact, I was talking, a couple months ago to Ali Ghodsi of Databricks on a big analyst conference call. And I asked him kind of an interesting question. I said, the new sea change in terms of functionality seems to be for companies to really leverage what the cloud providers, the hyperscalers put out there, what services they put out, and kind of cobble those together to create your new enterprise, as opposed to building things from scratch, which is what a lot of folks always did. And as well as I do, and Yves does for sure, how much homegrown software there is out there. It's all over the place. And not to say there's no value in that. Sure, there's value to it, but it doesn't typically scale very well. And so I think that's why this digital backbone concept is pretty clever. And we talked about how now Software AG has the data, which is the foundation. That's StreamSets, data access, this fluid data concept. You've got web methods for the APIs. You've got ARIS for the engineering. You've got Cumulosity for the IoT space. I think this is a very clever construct, because again, the business doesn't really care about all the granular details of whether you're using ETL or ELT or whatever. Yes, a data engineer has to solve that for you, but the business person just wants, I want this new business model. I want to get going. Let's make this stuff happen. To me, the digital backbone is a pretty powerful term, because it does encapsulate what you really need to survive in this new world. But what do you think, Girish?
No, absolutely. Sometimes I wonder, maybe things shouldn't get hyped up too quickly, because then it allows us to actually deliver something meaningful of value. So I'm hoping, I didn't want to bring it up, but you brought it up, so I will go there a little bit. But first of all, I actually heard this honestly after the acquisition, and Stefan Seg, the chief product officer, came over to the StreamSets offices, and he kind of gave us kind of how they think about the pieces. And I loved it. And so, sadly, I still call our product the platform. I'm actually thinking about getting rid of the term platform from what we do, because, as he pointed out, platforms are what you try to build upon on top of, right? So you expect that to be the bottommost layer, and then you add value, and clearly things like data platforms do exactly that, and a lot of things in the CSPs offerings allow you to do that, build on top of, and typically your platform tends to be this kind of data apps and visualization or whatever, the sort of a stack. And this idea of saying, yes, it's a backbone, I think makes a lot of sense for effectively what used to be maybe like the middleware problem. In no way is middleware, it's all over the place. No, conceptually, I think by saying the idea is, to me, the qualities of a backbone, kind of giving you that ability to stand up and doing all the things that you need to do, but not really saying that you're built on top of me. You're actually supporting all the things that are in the enterprise. I think is a great analogy. So I've actually been telling people we need to switch all our blocks and diagrams from being whatever horizontal to vertical. So that'll solve all our problems, right? So and frankly, look, again, we had the waterworks analogy here, but I think just thinking very simply, there's a data backbone. There's an API backbone. There's, if you kind of think about it that way, I think we can potentially get people really from a market maturity perspective to understand the need for this kind of parallel set of things that's needed to solve, all the problems, because these problems otherwise are perceived to be solved, by taking a point solution. But I think if you think about it in its entirety, there's always something outside the quote control of
Right.
the of the platform itself. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yves, any comment you want to throw on that?
Yeah, I think you said the digital backbone. I was just trying to refer to the image I had in my head. It's kind of the waterworks, and you see your data in the pipeline flowing, and you pick up whatever you need. Initial concept of the data lake, but still a lot of points missing in there. I think it's mostly what I see changing as well is that we've been building a lot of the you mentioned APIs, a lot of the applications that use APIs to congest the data, to insert the data, to consume the data, but it's not powerful enough. And now we see databases becoming enormous powerful. So we see a change in there where the knowledge you need to get out of your data is being pushed back to the database. You get the insights together with the models which you really run into the database, and you get the insights. So that's where I see it's going into integrating the insights into the application, but in a different architecture setup in that. And I was wondering how intelligent are the transformers and the integrators from the StreamSets platform in itself?
yeah, look, I think the principle that I mentioned early on around instrumentation, I think, is an important one because, in a sense, and even when we were talking about search earlier on, search is only as good as the context and the data that you're working on, and that's why something that is low context, like all the web pages on earth, what Google managed to pull off, is a very different problem from when you get into that website and you can't do much around finding what you want in a particular website, right? So a gentleman called Andrew Ng, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Google Brain and the various other places, Carnegie Mellon Prof. I heard a talk from him a couple of years back where he said, it's like AI is the new electricity. You need to kind of make sure that you understand what data is that you're applying your AI on. So the smarts, I think, can come if you're actually capturing information, the metadata around the pipeline. So that's what we're at right now. We've got some user-defined smarts that can be put into the system. So if you know what you care about, what you're looking for, your data quality rules, et cetera, you can stick them into the pipelines and say, hey, tell me what's going on. But I envision a world, because we're actually got this instrumented from the ground up, I envision a world where we can collect, once we've collected enough information, and that's a great thing with cloud services now, you can collect this information if you're a cloud service. We think we can bring, in a very safe way, bring smarts to the kind of the problem of moving data around without actually needing to know too much about it. So bringing AI to the space is something that we our vision is there in getting us there, but it'll take a little bit longer.
Well, it's almost, again, I'm always trying to think of these different analogies, right? And I just thought to myself of like going to a baseball game, right? You're at a baseball game, you're watching the game, you want to go get a beer, a refreshment or something. Well, you can get up and go walk to the stands, or you can watch the beer guy walking around going, hey, you want some beer? And that's kind of what you've done on the data provisioning side, right? It's like, we're not going to make you come up to the concession to say, hey, can I get this batch window solved, please? Can I get this customer data, et cetera? Instead, you've kind of reinvented to much more of a push strategy. Like, okay, we're just going to create this flow of data around the organization, and you tap into it when you need. So you're not making people go to the concession stands. Is that about right, Girish?
Yeah, and exactly. So you can have little add-on, like somebody could sell that a little applet to that beer vendor, say, you don't need to be shouting out anymore because all this information is kind of floating around us. And here you go. I'm gonna point you to the exact person that's gonna buy, and the person that's now had too much, and you shouldn't be selling to, right? So
that's pretty funny. You're optimizing the flow, and that means optimizing business is the bottom line. What do you think, real quick?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think optimizing, operationalizing, changing the mindset. Those are really what we're helping do here for a business. So.
Yeah, and that's important because, again, data is the lifeblood. I mean, we talked about how every company and other shows has a de facto information architecture. I mean, data is getting from some place to another. Somehow it's happening right now. But if you optimize that, you're able to change minds. Seeing is believing. When you look at something and you understand, oh wow, look at how terrible the quality of this data is. No wonder we have all these unhappy customers. People aren't buying our stuff. There are lots of reasons why that may be the case, but once you can see it, and that's actually the very clever part of what Girish mentioned about their whole strategy from the word go, was to instrument the entire environment so you can watch and see and get measurements on what's happening, what's working, what's not working. That's the kind of thing that every baseball coach would want, right? Like if you know what is the health status of every player, what is the mental status of all these players, if you know that, you're going to win a lot of games, folks. But podcast bonus segment coming up next. Send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. You're listening to Inside Analysis.